The silverware clinked softly against porcelain, and the aroma of roasted duck mingled with the scent of cedar from the tree in the corner. Lunar New Year at my uncle's estate in California always looked like a painting. Lanterns glowing on the veranda, a fire crackling in the marble fireplace, glasses of rice, wine catching the light. To anyone passing by, it was the epitome of warmth and family. To me, it felt like a stage for a drama I never fit into. I hadn't been home in 7 years. 7 years of brief phone calls, holidays spent in silence, and long stretches where I convinced myself I didn't need to return. Yet here I was, seated at the long rosewood table, across from the man who had shaped my life in ways I never spoke aloud. My name is Mei Ling Chun. I am 35 years old, a colonel in the United States Army. That night, with a chopstick in my hand and a plate of duck before me, I felt more like an outsider than a niece. My uncle, Wei Jie-chun, sat at the head of the table, as he always had. His posture was stiff, his eyes piercing, the kind of gaze that could hush a room. My older brother, Jianhao, leaned back in his chair beside him, exuding the confidence of someone groomed to inherit power. I'd driven across the country in a government SUV, parked it down the road to avoid attention. I wore a simple sweater, jeans, and boots. No medals, no uniform, nothing to hint at the weight I carried. That was intentional. I wanted to face my family as myself, not the rank on my chest. The conversations swirled around me. Jianhao boasting about business deals, cousins chattering about who got into which university, my uncle nodding with measured approval. I stayed quiet, responding only when prompted, never invited to share. I pressed my chopsticks gently into the sticky rice, half listening, half recalling every reason I'd stayed away. Then my uncle cleared his throat. The chatter faded. He raised his glass, not for a toast, but to proclaim. His voice sliced through the room's warmth like a chill slipping under the door. "I've made my decision," he said, locking eyes with me for the first time that evening. "From this day forward, the company and the estate will belong to Jianhao. Mei Ling, you are not included in the will." The silence was heavy, stifling. I felt eyes darting between my uncle and me, waiting for a reaction, a protest, anything. Instead, I lowered my gaze, picked up a piece of duck, and brought it to my mouth as if nothing had been said. The meat was tender, fragrant with star anise, but I barely tasted it. I chewed slowly, deliberately, holding myself steady. I had survived ambushes, firefights, and nights when the sky blazed with tracer rounds. This was just another battlefield, different weapons, same old war. No one at that table knew who I truly was. Not yet. I didn't flinch that night, but inside, a memory pressed against my chest like a wound that never healed. My uncle's words, final and absolute, were familiar. They echoed the place I'd always occupied in his world. Growing up, I learned early where I stood. Jianhao and Liangwei, my brothers, were raised like heirs. On weekend mornings, they donned tailored jackets and followed my uncle to the company offices, where he'd rest a heavy hand on their shoulders, speaking to them as if they already carried the future. I watched them leave through the front gate, their polished shoes clicking on the stone path, while I was handed a cloth and told to help my aunt prepare dumplings or set the table. There was no malice in my aunt's eyes, only resignation. She had been raised in silence, and silence was what she passed to me. "Help me with the noodles, Mei Ling," she'd murmur while the men discussed investments and markets over tea in the study. It was as if my uncle had drawn an invisible line through the house. Opportunity on one side, expectation on the other. When I was 17, I told him about West Point. My voice shook, but my heart swelled with hope. My counselor had said I had the grades, the discipline, the leadership. I thought, just maybe, he'd see me differently if I wore that gray cadet uniform. He didn't pause. "Women don't belong on the battlefield," he said, his tone as unyielding as stone. "You'll marry a man who can provide. That's the life you need, not chasing guns and medals." I tried to argue. but the words withered under his stare. That night, long after the house fell silent, I packed an old suitcase. The handle was worn, the zipper stiff, but it held the only clothes I owned. I remember the lantern light glowing above as I dragged it across the gravel, each step heavier than the last. No one followed me. Not my aunt, not my brothers, and certainly not my uncle. That was the night I understood what it meant to be erased by your own family. It was the first time I swore I'd be seen on my own terms. Leaving home with that battered suitcase was the start, but West Point was where I learned what it meant to be truly tested. From the moment I arrived on campus, I felt the doubt in the air. It wasn't overt, but it lingered in the glances of upperclassmen and the whispers under their breath. She won't last. They weren't entirely wrong. The first months at West Point nearly shattered me. My palms bled from rope climbs, skin splitting as I gripped tighter, refusing to let go. My lungs burned during midnight runs up icy hills, boots pounding against frozen earth. Every step was a war with my own body. The uniform sat stiff on my shoulders, but its weight went beyond fabric. It carried the need to prove I belonged, not just to them, but to myself. I learned to stay silent when they smirked in the mess hall, to straighten my spine when they doubted I could keep up. Slowly, step by step, I did more than keep up. I led. I earned respect, not through words, but through sweat on the training field and bruises blooming dark on my shins. By graduation, I wasn't the girl dragging a suitcase into the night. I was an officer, sworn to serve. Deployment stripped away any illusions I still held. The desert wasn't a classroom. It was a crucible of sand, fire, and fear. Days bled into nights, the thrum of helicopters against the horizon becoming my pulse. That's where I met Sergeant Zhang Wei, older than me, with weary eyes that still found humor around campfires. He became the brother I never truly had. Steady, direct, unyielding. We faced firefights together, shared rations when supplies dwindled, and traded stories of home in whispers that carried us through the darkest nights. But war doesn't spare bonds. During a raid to free hostages, everything unraveled in seconds. Gunfire tore through the air, chaos swallowing us whole. I remember the crack of bullets, the haze of smoke, and Zhang shoving me against a wall. His body took the rounds meant for mine. He collapsed at my feet, blood seeping into the sand. I carried him out of that building, but I knew I couldn't carry the void he left behind. That loss has lived in me ever since, not as weakness, but as the fire driving me to fight harder, lead sharper, and never waste a moment. Some scars don't fade. Some become the map you follow. After Zhang's death, I carried more than my gear. When I returned home, I carried the silence of those who didn't make it back. The army gave me purpose, forged me in fire, but stepping from the desert into civilian life felt like landing on alien soil. I thought, maybe, home might feel different after all these years. I drove an old army SUV across California's rolling hills, its engine rattling with every mile. Dust trailed behind me, like memories that never quite fade. When I pulled into my uncle's estate, I didn't wear my uniform. I left the ribbons, the medals, the polished boots locked away. I wore a simple sweater, jeans, and worn leather boots, clothes that hid the rank tied to my name. I wanted to see if they could still see their niece, their sister, their blood. Inside, the house smelled the same, sandalwood and soy sauce, but the air was thick. Around the dining table, laughter rose and fell like a tide I couldn't join. Jianhao's voice dominated, boasting about the company's new ventures, deals that made my uncle nod with pride. The others leaned in, raising glasses of rice, wine, and admiration. I sat near the end of the table, unnoticed, like a shadow in a family portrait. To them, I was the girl who vanished into the military, wasting years in deserts across the globe. They called it service with polite smiles, but their eyes said failure. Then Xiaoyu spoke. My niece, 13, bright-eyed and fidgeting in her chair, noticed the plain ring I wore on my hand. Aunt Mei Ling, she asked softly, Where did you get that? It doesn't look like Mom's rings. Her curiosity pierced the room, louder than any toast. For a moment, all eyes turned to me, heavy and expectant. I smiled at her, shaking my head gently. It's just a reminder, I said. Nothing more. Xiao Yu's gaze lingered, searching, trying to unravel a story no one else cared to ask. But the moment passed. The conversation drifted back to profits, partnerships, and possessions. I sat there, quiet, the hum of voices like static. The house I grew up in had never felt so crowded, yet I had never felt more alone. The conversation rolled on, weaving around me like smoke. I couldn't breathe. I sat in my silence, steadying myself as I did before a mission. Slow breaths, eyes forward, waiting. I thought I could endure the evening by simply surviving it. But my uncle had other plans. He raised his glass. The sound of his glass tapping against the silver rim silenced the chatter. Everyone turned to my uncle, Wei Jiechun. The Wei soldiers snapped to attention at a commander's call. Even in his late 60s, his presence commanded the room, his voice heavy as iron. I've reached a decision, he said, his gaze sweeping the table before locking onto me. His tone was calm, almost detached, as if the words were mere business. Jianhao will inherit the company, the estate, the assets, everything. He is the future of this family. He paused, not to reconsider, but to drive the point home. Mei Ling, you chose the wrong path. Because of that, you will receive nothing. The words struck like a gavel. For a moment, no one moved. Jianhao leaned back, a faint smile curling his lips, the kind that comes when victory was never in doubt. Uncles and cousins nodded, some raising their glasses in approval, as if they'd long awaited this verdict. My aunt lowered her eyes to her plate, her fingers twisting the edge of her napkin as if it could shield her discomfort. She didn't look at me. She never did when it mattered most. I felt their judgment swell like a tide. The niece who strayed too far, who gave her years to the army instead of the family legacy. In their eyes, I was a wayward thread in a tapestry they'd already decided to trim. But I didn't flinch. My fingers rested lightly on my chopsticks, steady, unshaken. I picked up a piece of duck, brought it to my mouth, and chewed slowly. No words, no protest, not even the spark of anger they might have expected. The silence that followed wasn't mine. It was theirs, the weight of their unease pressing down, filling the room until breathing felt heavy. The weight of my uncle's words still hung in the air when the silence broke. Not by me, but by the scrape of a chair. Liang Ji, one of my uncle's oldest friends, rose slowly, broad-shouldered. His posture still carried the discipline of a lifetime in the Navy. I remembered him from childhood dinners, the man who'd slip me a red bean candy when no one was looking. Wei Jia, he said, his voice calm but cutting through the thick air. Before you celebrate your nephew's inheritance, there's something everyone here should see. He pulled his phone from his pocket, tapped the screen, and turned up the volume. The sharp jingle of a CNN broadcast filled the room, stark against the soft clink of porcelain. Faces turned as he held the phone high, its glow casting a spotlight. On the screen, a reporter stood before the Pentagon, the banner reading, "Breaking news. U.S. Army Colonel Mei Ling Chun awarded Medal of Honor." The words felt surreal, even to me. I hadn't wanted this night to be about that part of my life. But Liang Ji had ripped the curtain away. The broadcast continued, my name spoken clearly, footage from the ceremony earlier that week. A general saluting, the Secretary of Defense pinning the medal on my uniform. It was all there, undeniable, unyielding. The room felt utterly still. Jianhao's smirk crumbled, his face tightening as if the air had been pulled from his lungs. My aunt's napkin slipped from her hands, tears welling as her lips quivered. My uncle, the unyielding Wei Jiechun, went pale, his jaw clenched, but no words came. Then Xiao Yu's voice rang out, high and clear, untouched by pretense. "Aunt Mei Ling, she gasped, eyes wide with awe. You're a hero. Every gaze turned to me. For the first time that evening, I raised my head and met their eyes without wavering. My voice was quiet, steady, but it carried across the table like a blade. I just did my duty, I said. Xiao Yu's eyes sparkled with wonder. The others sat stunned, their certainty unraveling. In that moment, the power in the room shifted. It no longer rested with the man at the head of the table. It rested with me, the niece they had dismissed, the soldier they had erased, the woman they could no longer ignore. The room was still reeling when my uncle, Wei Jiechun, rose abruptly, his chair scraping harshly against the polished floor. He didn't address the others, didn't raise his glass again, didn't even glance at Jianhao. His eyes fixed solely on me. Without a word, he turned and strode toward the hallway, his steps uneven, shoulders tighter than I'd ever seen. Then he paused, glanced back just once, and gestured for me to follow. I rose slowly. The others parted in silence, their confidence stripped bare. I followed him into his study, the same room I'd been forbidden to enter as a child, where business and legacy were forged behind closed doors. The heavy teak door shut behind us, and suddenly it was just the two of us. For the first time in my life, my uncle didn't seem larger than the walls around him. His voice, once iron and command, trembled as he spoke. I was wrong, he said, almost a whisper. God help me, I was blind. I thought I was protecting you. I stood across from him, the distance between us wider than the years we'd lost. My throat tightened, but my voice held steady. Protecting me? I asked. By denying me? By turning me into a ghost at your table? You didn't protect me, Uncle. You erased me. His hand shook as he reached for the edge of his desk, then for a small frame at its corner. It was a photograph of me in high school, hair pulled back, a shy smile frozen in time. He clutched it as if it might break. I told myself the world would break you, he murmured, tears tracing the stern lines of his face. I never believed you could stand in it stronger than me. The sight of Wei Jiechun, the unyielding patriarch, reduced to a man trembling before his niece, was something I never thought I'd witness. For years, I'd imagined confronting him, proving him wrong, forcing him to see me. But standing in that dim study, I realized I didn't need his wealth, his estate, or even his approval. I don't need your company or your inheritance, I said, meeting his gaze without flinching. I just needed you to see me. And finally you do. For the first time, he wept openly, shoulders collapsing, his hand gripping the photo like a lifeline. And for the first time, I didn't feel small in his presence. When we returned to the dining room, the air had changed. The weight of pride and arrogance that once dominated the table had dissipated, leaving something raw, uneasy, almost reverent. My uncle didn't reclaim his seat at the head. He stood silent, eyes lowered in a way that unsettled everyone who knew him as unshakable. I returned to my chair, but this time I wasn't invisible. The conversation didn't resume immediately. Chopsticks hovered, glasses sat untouched. For the first time in years, their eyes were on me, not with dismissal, but with the heavy realization of what they'd failed to see. Xiao Yu slipped from her mother's side and sat next to me. Her small hand brushed mine, her eyes alive with a spark of curiosity and courage. She looked up at me, her voice steady but brimming with wonder. Someday, she whispered, I want to wear the uniform too, like you. Her words hit deeper than any medal or ceremony ever could. I squeezed her hand gently, my heart swelling with a quiet pride I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. Liangji, still standing at the far end of the table, cleared his throat. His gaze swept the room, steady and sharp, before settling on my uncle. Legacy, he said, his voice measured. Isn't written in ledgers or locked in vaults. It's carried in courage and honor, in the choices we make when no one believes in us. That's what lasts. The room fell silent again, But this time the silence wasn't heavy. It was a recognition, a shift, something old breaking apart, something new taking hold. I turned to Xiaoyu and offered her a small smile, one that carried both encouragement and challenge. She held my gaze, her shoulders squaring slightly, as if she grasped more than her 13 years should allow. As the evening drew to a close, I felt a weight lift, not because I had claimed what my uncle had withheld, but because I no longer needed it. There are things no family can give, things no inheritance can buy. You fight for them, earn them, carry them alone until they're yours. And when you stand in that truth, you realize value isn't measured in wealth, but in the paths you dared to tread, even when the world turned away.